so that we can post this meeting on our website. So again, thank you all for coming to the June Access to Justice Board meeting. All right. The first item are the May minutes, which were in the materials. Are there any changes to the additions, edits to the minutes? Then if not, can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll move to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Jeremiah. A second. Vanna, thank you for seconding. All right, all the ATJ board members, all in favor of approving the minutes, raise your hand. Any opposed? Any abstaining? All right, the minutes are approved. This is a very brief next item, which is the update on the Office of Civil Legal Aid Director search. I will just say that we sent out an RFP, as people know, for search firms. There were 8 that responded. The field has been narrowed to 4. Their interviews are going to be, for those 4 interviews are going to be in the next week, 10 days. And by July 1st, we will have made a decision about which search firm we're going to go with. Just a reminder that the Supreme Court is requiring the names of the 3 finalists by November 17th. And that gives the search firm about 4.5 months to do its work, including surveying the community, public meetings. We're hoping to have public job talks that people can give their input back, their feedback on, and then the final decision will be made. So that's the update on the OCLA search. Judge Keenan, do you want to give an update on the ATJ board recruitment?
Sure, thanks, Terry. So I think we had 22 applicants. Just a reminder, we're recruiting to fill 2 positions. Sadly, both Michelle Lucas and Judge Corbett are leaving us a little bit later this year. So I think we had 22 applicants. We're interviewing a number of those. Some of them we interviewed before because some individuals had applied in the past. And we've completed, I think, 7 interviews so far. We hope to complete the rest next week. And we anticipate getting our search committees, our recruitment committees recommendations to the board for the board materials by July 7th for consideration by the full board at the July 14th meeting. And then after that, presumably those recommendations would be transmitted to the WISPA Board of Governors and eventually to the Supreme Court, because we'd want to seat these 2 individuals in September.
Thank you very much. We have 2 presentations, the Yakima Valley Needs Assessment and the Liaison Report, the Interpreter Commission. Before, I want to take a brief pause on those for an item that was not on the agenda that came to us at the very last moment, and I just circulated with the board. So we heard 2 days ago that Chelan County District Court had drafted some new local court rules. When we were in Wenatchee, we heard from NJP how local court rules are, it's just when you're in a multi-state, multi-county practice, local court rules are just very difficult to keep track of because they change from county to county where the practice is. And for statewide entities, this becomes very complicated. Well, these Chelan County district court rules are also complicated in a different way. Their local court, proposed local general rule 1 is about decorum and diligence, and particularly calls out pro se or self-represented litigants, and their good, like, the language they use is good courtroom practice. And the board was concerned that the words good courtroom practice would be um, a trap for the unwary, let's say. So we drafted a response to these rules. Thank you, Judge Keenan, for drafting that, circulated to the board. And just to point out to the Chelan County District Court that the self-represented litigants won't necessarily know these rules. We don't want the rules to be used as traps. And that in fact, the court has an obligation to self-represented litigants not to set them up. I don't know if that's a high-level overview. I don't know, Judge Keenan, if you want to add anything to what I said.
Thanks, Terry. I'll add, appreciate Michael Terasaki bringing this to our attention. And, you know, the Code of Judicial Conduct, I serve on the Superior Court Judges Association's Unrepresented Litigants Ad Hoc Working Group. And one thing that we did, this might have been the year before last, was propose, which ultimately was adopted, an addition to the Code of Judicial Conduct that lists, I think, 22 different things that a judge can do to work with unrepresented litigants in their courtroom. And so when I saw this proposed rule, my concern was that expecting unrepresented litigants to act consistently with good courtroom practice might actually conflict, or at least be in tension with judges' ethical obligations. And so we pointed that out, and we'll see what they do.
So the motion is for to the board members is to give me the authority to send the response back to Chelan County District Court on their about their proposed rule. Michael Terasaki notes that local Wenatchee attorney Jeremy Burke alerted us to this. So just will someone make the motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Someone second the motion. Thank you, Mike. All right. All board members in favor of responding to Chelan County District Court about this, per what I circulated, raise your hands. All right. Any opposed? Any abstaining?
So, Terry, this is Judge Hankey.
Oh, welcome.
Thank you. I'm not sure if I'm a voting member or not.
You are not a voting member.
Okay, that's what I thought. All right, thank you. Just wanted to make sure.
But I believe you are our new liaison from the district.
DCM, yes. Well, along with Anthony Geip, we're co-representing from DMCJA.
Oh, excellent. Well, welcome. We're happy to
Thank
have
you. Thank you.
All right. So I see in the chat, Bryn had to step away. So we just voted on that the motion to send something to Chelan County District Court. Do you want to approve or abstain?
This was Dave's.
Yes.
This was the letter. Yes. Support, please.
Thank you. Jeremiah, I see your hand up.
I voted in favor of a response, but I am interested to know exactly what circumstances, if any, prompted them to propose this rule. I know things are moving fast, but I think that would give us some insight if, in the event there might be some possible language change that might address whatever concerns that they were trying to get at with the proposed rule. But I recognize what Judge Keenan said about there being codes of judicial conduct and all of those being relevant with respect to this.
Excellent question. And Michael, if through your context you can find out what was the driving force, we'd be quite interested in that.
Yeah, I'll actually be talking with Jeremy later today, and I could ask the Chelan Douglas VLP if they know anything also, and I'll try to get back to you all with that.
Great. All right, then moving on in our agenda, we have the Yakima Valley Needs Assessment Report. I see Elizabeth Fitzgerald, and I saw Blanca Rodriguez.
Yes, we're both
Oh,
here.
there we go. Yep. So
Thank you.
welcome. And I saw that Elizabeth, you now have hosting capabilities. So
It's just so I can take over the meeting. There's no
absolutely.
yeah, I'm gonna just share a few slides just so we can stay on schedule because we have so much to talk about with this needs assessment. Okay, so Blanca, do you want to start us off? I'm Elizabeth Fitzgerald, by the way, and Blanca and I are the co-chairs of the Undocumented Communities Subcommittee of the DISCO, the ATJ Board. There's not enough acronyms in there. And we were tasked with overseeing a needs assessment of the Yakima Valley. So I'm going to pass it to Blanca.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and it is great to be with you guys this morning. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes, awesome. Okay. Well, our committee thought that it was really important to conduct a needs assessment for undocumented immigrants to learn what the community needs were and not just make assumptions about what they were. And we unfortunately didn't have resources to conduct the needs assessment for the entire state. But thank you to the ATJ, we were able to get funding from you to focus on Yakima County. And we decided to focus on Yakima County because it has a large majority of immigrants. Yet it is also a county that does, in fact, have a lot of legal resources available. So we thought that that would be a good sample. And one thing for those of you who don't know me, I am from the Yakima Valley. I grew up here. I, after law school, came back and practiced in Yakima County doing legal services for the last 25 years. So a lot of this is not new to me, but I thought it was really informative, some of the demographic information. So I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about it. So like I said, Yakima County has a large Latinx population. In fact, Yakima County is the county in our state with the largest majority Latinx population at 50.6%, which is pretty high. It's a majority Latinx county. Also, it has a large number of undocumented individuals. There is strong evidence to support that there's 24,000 undocumented immigrants here in Yakima County. There are also, Yakima also has the highest percentage of undocumented immigrants as a percentage of the total population, which is really significant. It's 8.5%. And that there are only in the entire country, there's only a few other places that exceed this rate. There's two places in Texas, 2 in California, and 1 in Georgia. So very much important to know that Yakima County is majority Latinx, and also that we have a very large percentage of undocumented folks living here in Yakima County. So a little bit about the immigrants that live in our county, a little bit more about them. The majority of undocumented people in Yakima County, which is not true in other places, is that most have been here for a very long time. 75% have been here for 10 years. And some over 20 years. And half of these families have or mixed households, they have US citizen children. The other thing to note is that the population is a little bit older, 91% or over or 16 years or older, which the majority, 73%, between 25 and 54 years of age. So it's an older population, it's a settled population that has been here a long time. Also, 67% of the undocumented immigrants in our county do not speak English well, which is a very high number, and 97% speak Spanish at home. So again, the primary language is Spanish. Unfortunately, for undocumented immigrants over 25 years of age or older, the educational high school rate or equivalent GED rate is not very high. It's only 19%. So again, we have a settled out population that has been here a long time, that is a little older, that does not speak English, and is not, fortunately, is not getting the education, that is needed. The other thing about Yakima County is that agriculture is the largest industry. It has the largest share of jobs, and it employs the vast majority of both documented and undocumented immigrants. I have heard statistics like over 90% of the people that work in agriculture are Latinx, so very high percentage. And the agricultural industry employs 54% of those people that are undocumented. So a high percentage of undocumented workers work in agriculture. And the thing about agriculture is that the pay is not it's not good, right? Minimum wage for the most part. And the other thing about agriculture is that for a lot of jobs, particularly jobs that women have, they're mostly seasonal jobs. So important to know that about Yakima County. And I think because of that, we have a high poverty rate. It's a 16.5% poverty rate as compared to the entire state, which is 10.2%. So much higher than what we have for the entire state. And then the other interesting thing is that the poverty rate increases if you move down to the Middle Valley, so Wapato, Toppenish, and then if you go down to the Lower Valley, it's a little bit better than Middle Valley, but not much more. So lots of poverty in the middle and lower part of Yakima County. So really important information that we thought we wanted to highlight out of the report. And I'll pass it on to Elizabeth to talk about needs.
Perfect, thanks. So we aren't going to spend a lot of time on this because one, you have all received the study in some degree at this point. We really encourage you to read through it. There is a lot of content there. And we want to dig into the parts of the recommendations that we as a committee want to elevate. But I did want to take a moment just to address really high level how this needs assessment was conducted and some of the thoughts that we want folks to keep in mind as they read this. So there are definitely elements in there that are pulled from external sources such as census, point in time count, national and state data that's readily available. And that does address a much larger population. So a lot of the content that Blanca was just going over is from those larger resources. But the specifics about legal needs assessment and access to the justice system were really taken from one-on-one in-depth interviews that were conducted by the researchers. And those were just 37 interviews. So very rich conversations, but our sample size is 37. So keeping in mind that really shouldn't be used to infer any wide sweeping opinions or perspectives about the legal system when we are talking about what specifically their legal issues are, or their specific demographics. What was elevated, though, were the reasons why they had trouble accessing the system. And it was that real qualitative conversation that has contributed to some of the recommendations that we're going to be making. I do want to, so a lot of this should not really come as a surprise. Barriers to access that folks don't know how to identify legal issues or where to access them. Those were not surprising to us as a committee. But I also wanted to point, as we're talking about the Yakima community, that just the attorney availability is so much more sparse than the rest of the state. So in Yakima, there is an attorney to resident ratio of 1 to 667, which is nearly, a half to a third of what the statewide ratio is. And then specifically, if we're looking at Latinx identifying attorneys, just 2.6% in the state of Washington, as opposed to nationwide, which is nearly 6%. So when we have a population that is predominantly Latinx and Spanish speaking, and very, very few attorneys who are even representative of that community, let alone available at all, that's contributing to a lot of this disconnect. The other thing is that this needs assessment was conducted during the pandemic, and that meant that we just really couldn't see physical face-to-face interviews happening. So they were being conducted by phone and Zoom. And one of the main takeaways from this needs assessment is that the people who are trying to access services in the Yakima Valley really value in-person, face-to-face connection in order to trust the legal system. So we want to call out that even just the nature of being interviewed by somebody who you can't necessarily see may have contributed to a little lack in transparency or trust in these results. All right, but we want to dig into our priorities, and I'm going to turn that back over to Blanca.
Thank you, Elizabeth. One thing that that Elizabeth highlighted was the attorney to individual ratio, which is extremely low for Yakima County, and really starts at, the number of Latinx attorneys for entire state is super low as well, very, very low. So as she pointed out, it's even more stark in a county like Yakima, where there is a big need for face-to-face interactions, and to be able to speak to somebody who can speak directly to the individual without the need for an interpreter, because things are lost in interpretation, and it is always better to have direct communication. But even knowing that, we know that we're not likely to ever have enough lawyers for all of the legal needs that are out there in our communities. And definitely, we're not going to have, not in my lifetime, I don't think, enough lawyers of color who really actually represent the communities that they work in. And so we need alternatives to the way that we deliver services to this community. And I think that was what resonated most from reading the needs assessment, and from what we learned from the needs assessment, that there's a lot of need and lots of gaps, and that attorneys by themselves, even though there's work that we should be doing to increase the number of attorneys, that really we need other alternatives. And Elizabeth will talk a little bit about that, about what those alternatives should be. But these two things, increasing the number of attorneys and increasing services in other ways, they need to work in tandem, and we need to be working towards those two things together. And some of the recommendations that we're going to be making, and we're putting this in a letter that we're going to be sending out to the ATJ board hopefully next week, but we really do think that improving the Rule 6 law clerk program, that there's ways to improve the program, and we'll talk about some of our recommendations in our letter, that could really serve the community and create more attorneys that represent the community in Yakima. And I can give you one example of, recently my husband and we mentored a young woman through the law clerk program, and she's taking the bar in July, and it's amazing, she'll be an asset to the community. And if we just keep growing that kind of program so that folks like her who really wanted to stay in this community can become lawyers, I think that's an amazing opportunity to grow more attorneys in rural communities like Yakima. In addition, our committee supports having either a law school or a satellite type of program here in Eastern Washington. There are many great potential attorneys in this area that just don't want to leave because they have roots here and still want to become lawyers. So an opportunity for them to be able to stay here and go to law school will only increase the numbers of attorneys who actually stay in these communities. So we need to be working on that, but we also need to be working on alternatives. And I'll pass it on to Elizabeth to talk about that.
For sure, yes. So this letter is like 7 pages at this point that we're writing. It's going to be great. There's some really rich ideas that we have in there. And a lot of it is about how to make pathways to being an attorney more accessible. And there just will never be enough lawyers, we do not believe, to sufficiently provide timely and quality services to people who need legal services. And so we fully endorse and support and really want to encourage the ATJ board to start now really investigating alternative models to legal services. There are models across the country, and we cite to a couple of them in our letter, that have anywhere from community justice workers in Alaska to embedded liaisons in tribal communities and tribal courts in Montana, to in Oklahoma, they utilize law students to directly provide a lot of wills and trusts, legal services under an overarching model. So there's a lot of ways in which direct services can be delivered, can be done so safely and effectively and with the right guardrails. And most importantly, in these models, we're seeing that the people who are delivering these services are representative of the community. They're embedded in the community. They're people who are already looked to as the doers, the resource finders, and they're given pathways to take it a step further and connect people to the right resources. And we really want to discourage folks from being, too scared to investigate that, because we have seen it work and we've seen it work well. And the other component is obviously accredited representatives. A big part of the undocumented communities subcommittee is looking at immigration services and how do we reduce barriers to providing legal services for immigration. And we all know that that relies very heavily on the accredited representative model. There are not enough to provide those services. They also are not able to provide the full continuum of services that are needed by our community members. But we do believe there are some ways to really keep a tight look on the services they're providing while increasing access to them and even the numbers in certain circumstances. And I'll pass it, I believe, Blanca, to our next one.
Yeah, and in the vein of immigration services, our committee also supports the recommendation to remove the state restriction that prohibits the Office of Civil Legal Aid funding for immigration work under the statute that we have, RCW 2.53.032. We really think that we should be working towards making funding as unrestricted as possible, and that we should be allocating, that the allocation of funding should be determined by the Alliance, who knows best, what the needs are. And I think we believe this because it will optimize the delivery services and the operations that we all currently have. So that will be another recommendation in our report. And Elizabeth, you're talking about technology.
Yes, and finally, we have a lot of pride in the centralized intake model that we have in Washington State. It does a lot of really great things, and the people who are even working within that at NJP and CLEAR identify so many ways that they really want to re-examine how folks access that centralized intake and the role it plays in the state. And we, as people who are neither Blanca or I work for NJP, we're not part of CLEAR, they do sit on the committee. Eva Westcott has drafted a portion of the letter that addresses these recommendations. So I want to make clear that this has been a collaborative recommendation. But there is, even if we eliminate funding restrictions and we come up with the alternatives to lawyers, and we're incorporating accredited reps, and we're bringing in all these attorneys of color and returning them to rural communities, we still are faced with the issue that people who need legal services don't know how to access them and have a difficult time identifying their issues and getting connected to the right people. And at the same time, we know that the people we're talking about, undocumented immigrants, especially in rural communities, do not trust calling a phone number where they cannot see the person on the other end. And so what are some ways that we integrate technologies that are already embraced by these communities to engage them with a system that we rely heavily on and that does do a lot of work, but do it in a way that is actually going to bring more people on board, whether that's through texting or WhatsApp, physically putting people in communities that act as a liaison or a hub into a centralized network. There's a lot of room to really re-examine this, and we encourage the board to put some energy and effort into that as well. And I believe that is it. So I'm going to stop this share.
Yeah, we want to again thank the ATJ board for funding this needs assessment. I think we learned a really invaluable information, and we hope to send you our recommendations next week. So thank you. I don't know if anybody has questions.
Thank you, Blanca and Elizabeth. I see Esperanza has a question.
Thank you so much for all that hard work. I know it was a lot of work, especially during the pandemics, and so necessary. One question I had, was there anything that you would have liked to have included in the study but weren't able to include? And if so, what was that, and why weren't you able to include it, that you learned that would have been nice if we could have done this, but you couldn't?
That's a good question. I mean, I definitely, there were a lot of lessons learned, I think, and our committee still kind of needs to get together to discuss what our big takeaways are. I think more than anything, the sample size, right? And how do you get the information in a reliable way with a small sample? Probably is something that occurs to me. Elizabeth, I don't know if you have other thoughts.
No, I think that's it. I think the slide deck, honestly, maybe even putting tighter bounds on what the study was so that it could go deeper in certain things. It was pretty like, the brief we gave the researchers was just tell us about the Yakima community, tell us their problems with accessing legal services. What do they think about when they think of legal aid? There's a lot in there. And so that meant that certain things that came up were like, yeah, we know that. Like, and we probably have thought about it more. We have more context than researchers brought in to do this. And rather than saying, well, now that we have seen these things rise to the top, there's like additional information we need. And it would have been nice if we'd said like, specifically research alternatives to lawyers for us. And then like, provide that as part of a supplement, or something about like law schools or the Rule 6 program. But we don't, you don't know until you do it. But I think that would be like, bringing the bounds a little bit so that we can go even deeper would have been nice.
You see Bob Lichtenberg.
I have a question for the researchers. I note from your data that 97% of 24,000 people don't speak English at home. And if you look at the ratio of one person to 667 lawyers, it just makes me wonder, how do you guys communicate with these people who don't speak English? I note from just a quick search of our interpreter database, there are only 6 interpreters, Spanish-speaking interpreters that live in Yakima city, Yakima itself. There are only 6 of them. Many of them are working in other areas other than the courts. And so I'm kind of wondering how the chances of language access would be for this kind of situation you're reporting on.
I can speak to, I imagine it works very similarly to the rest of the state, but Blanca is also in the community. I mean, legal aid providers, at least those within the Alliance, we provide interpretation for everybody, but that adds to our costs. And that it's just very expensive, right? And if we're centering language access, then it's important that we're paying for this. But when you get into communities where pretty much such a majority of the people that you serve are going to need to have paid interpretation, I imagine that is even more difficult. Blanca?
So that's exactly right. And this is why also, I think the biggest recommendation that we want to make, or the most important recommendation, is alternatives to lawyers that can share information, that are from the community and can speak the language of the communities that they're working with. I think that will be an important step.
Thank you. I see Vanna.
Hi, great work, guys. I'm going to be honest, I didn't read the report or anything, but I just wanted to find out, did you guys have focus groups, or how did you guys get those 37 people to come? And if you're able, or did you compensate them for their time, and how did you?
I'm happy to talk about that. Yes, the folks were compensated. They were given a $25 gift card. The interviews were done over the phone, and they were about a half an hour. And Isabel Reyes Paz did the interview. She was one of the researcher, and had a set of questions that she was asking the individuals in Spanish. I think there was one person that out of the 27 that she did in English.
And they were identified by working with existing community partners to make this opportunity aware, make their constituents aware of this opportunity to participate in this interview. And then they provided the referral to Isabel. So legal aid and non-legal aid service providers were involved in directing folks to try to get as many people to participate as possible.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. I'll just add, this is consistent with what we heard in Wenatchee from groups. It is not just the legal service providers. It is, there was a story, a powerful story told to us about someone who in the community who received a jury summons and didn't know what to do with the jury summons, and went to a non-legal service provider, but a community provider, and said, what is this and what do I do with it? And they felt some bit hampered of their ability. They could explain what it is, but hampered in their ability to explain what to do about it. So I think that this is, we're seeing this in a lot of counties, and we'll look forward to getting your report. And already I'm thinking of sharing it with the Practice of Law Board as well. In the chat, I noticed that Bryn had put in about sharing the slides with us.
Yeah, no problem. I can do that. I actually messaged Nick a link you can feel free just to pull it from there, or I can send it, whatever you prefer. Nick, just let me know by email, but I'll get it out to you.
Great. And I noticed Jim's comment in the chat about that this is a deep and meaningful addition to information upon which the trajectory of civil legal aid effort will be determined. So that's great. Caitlin, were you going to, your microphone is on, but not anymore. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for that. And we very much will look forward to the now 7-page letter that's coming to us. Thank you both for all of your work, and to Isabel.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right, next.
Bye, everyone.
Next on our agenda, we have Bob Lichtenberg, and we have Robert Lichtenberg, and we have James Wells with their liaison report from the Interpreter Commission and the Disability Justice Task Force.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Bob Lichtenberg. I'm with the Stream and Record Language and Interpreter Commission. And I'm also representing the Disability Justice Task Force. I'd like to give everybody an update on what the Commission's been doing. As some of you might be aware, the Commission has expanded from 15 members to 20 members. And one of the things that the Commission wanted to do is added more voices to the table from language communities. So to that end, we've invited people from deaf community to join the Commission. And we've also expanded the Commission's role to cover other areas of language access, such as document translations, access to information on websites, trying to get best practices for the use of court forms. And so with that expansion of roles and responsibilities for the Commission, we have new people on board. And so as a result of that change in direction, the Commission did a strategic planning retreat, or actually a series of meetings about what the Commission should be doing over the next 2 years. I'd like to share with everybody quickly the highlights of what the strategic priorities are. Some of them require a little bit of background. But first off, because of COVID, we did not really have a chance to get people together to have a statewide staff training. So we went to, there has been a lot of turnover in the courts. And so the Commission wants to do is provide across the board training from all of the court staff that work in language access areas. And so James is working on creating several training modules that will also be available for other people that work in the language access area, have a better understanding of how to serve people who don't speak English, who use sign language. Another thing that the Commission has been working on is the fact that the registered interpreters for the deaf, they have a court interpreter exam. It's called a specialist certificate legal, SGL, that's what it's called. They sunsetted that court interpreter exam for sign language interpreters back in 2016 for financial reasons. Fast forward, a number of states are saying, well, we have language in our books. It says we have to use a RID, SGL interpreter. We need to have some kind of test that, screens sign language interpreters for court work. And so to that end, the Commission made it a priority to work on a national level with the registered interpreters for the deaf and a number of other states to try to find a way to fund the development of the sign language interpreter test for court interpreters for deaf people. And so that's about a $500,000 project. And so we're trying to get a number of other states to seed fund test development. It's probably going to be about a 2-year effort before we see the test come out. But hopefully, you're going to get this test in place, because it's long been my belief that if there are other people in other languages can have a performance-based exam, then deaf people should be entitled to have a performance-based exam that screens court interpreters for their needs. So I really believe that having this kind of test in place will be really helpful to both judges and to the public. Now, another thing the Commission is also focusing on that James will talk a little bit about is the fact that we're losing interpreters. Many interpreters are retiring, leaving the profession. Because of Zoom, we're also able to find other work in other areas, not just court work. And so we're starting to see an inability of many of the courts to get interpreters that are court certified. They're not available. So we basically need to expand the pool of interpreters, not just in the court, but in other areas of a language access. And so Jane will talk more about that. One of the things the commission would also like to do is have a user test, a court user survey. That's obviously going to have to be done in multiple languages. And so we're going to try to find a way to best get information from court users, what their experience is, assessing court services, court programs, court proceedings, and websites, and how that can be improved so that they can be able to, in many cases, serve as pro se for themselves and be able to get that information as they need. So hopefully the commission, that surely will help us have an action plan to develop better ways to serve the public. Also, RCW 2.42 and RCW 2.43, those are both court interpreter statutes. They're long overdue for revisions and updating. And so to that end, the commission just finished updating a draft of RCW 2.42 and RCW 2.43. And we're going to be submitting that to the legislature. The Board of Judicial Administration hopefully will adopt those statutory revisions. We will have a new statute that get rid of dead letter language that's already in the law. And one of the things that the commission also is going to be starting off is working on document translation best practices. So hopefully within the next several years, you'll be able to get a needs assessment for costs that the courts will be burdened with if they do try to update their websites, have their websites translated, and other court forms translated on a local level. We'll also be scoping out how to best, financially support that development for all of the local courts, especially with regard to things that are not pattern forms. We also expanded the scope of the language interpreter program. We have more people in now hired to be part of that program. When I first joined, there was just one person handling the court interpreter program, and the testing and certification of court interpreters. Now you have almost 5 people. The reimbursement program staff, we have someone who's going to be helping with the language access plans, try to possibly revise language access plans, and making them more usable by court staff. Okay, that's basically the priorities the commission is focusing on for the next few years. And so, having said that, I'd also like to move over to the Disability Justice Task Force. Judge Keenan is a key member of the Disability Justice Task Force. So if you ever have any questions about what we're doing, the fun that we're going to be having to change this system for people with disabilities, Judge Keenan is a good person to talk to. So the Disability Justice Task Force is comprised right now of about 8 people. There's co-chair David Redby, and this co-chair Justice Whitener. And right now we're trying to put together a core group of task force members that will do 2 things: create the mission of this task force beyond just having the disability justice study. Now, the disability justice study is a 2-year project. We got $800,000 from the legislature to do this study, and this study will focus on a lot of areas in which the law intersects with people with disabilities. It also will include focusing on how people with disabilities that work in the profession are treated by the profession itself, judges with disabilities, attorneys with disabilities, those kinds of things. We will try to focus on how these things are intersected. Hopefully we will have a study report very similar to the study report by the Gender Justice Commission and gender bias. We want to focus on a lot of areas of the judicial thinking about bias, about people with disabilities, and have that research in some of the judicial decisions that the searchers make about people with disabilities. And a lot of it is based on those biases, those myths. So hopefully the judge will be recruiting people to join the commission. So probably within the next few weeks, we'll have a website set up with an application form for people to join the Disability Justice Task Force and perhaps be part of the study itself, taking charge of some of the study areas, guiding the researchers. We'll be hiring about 4 or 5 people to help do the coordinated research work and focus on different areas of the law that impact people with disabilities. Okay, if anybody has any questions, I can wait. But if James wants to go ahead, I mean, I'll leave it over to Mr. Price to tell me how you want this to go.
Well, it looks like Jeremiah has a question.
I did. To what extent is mental disabilities in the scope of work?
You want people who have knowledge about how the law affects people with mental disabilities. You know, mental retardation, mental illness. Want that? Yes.
Great. So James, were you going to present as well?
Yes, I have a few slides just for some context. Let me pull those up. Hopefully you're seeing them now. As Bob mentioned, my name is James Wells, and I work with the Court Interpreter Program at the Administrative Office of the Courts. And as Bob mentioned, one of the strategic priorities of the Commission is interpreter recruitment, and which is a really big issue right now. And I think it's becoming more and more noticed by more and more people. And it's not just in Washington, it's kind of all around the country. But just a little bit of context for Washington. So these numbers are specifically for spoken language interpreters, which is kind of the main, where the AOC has the most authority. Sign language interpreters are handled by the Office of Deaf and Hard of Hearing. Right now in Washington, we have approximately 350 credentialed interpreters. That includes certified and registered languages. We have interpreters in 43 languages, and just over half are Spanish interpreters, which kind of is a good reflection of kind of the needs that we have. But the 43 languages, it does show that Washington has quite a diverse need compared to some other states. But some of these numbers can also be deceiving. As Bob mentioned, we have interpreters who are retiring. A lot of our interpreters have been working here, or they were credentialed in the 90s. And so they are retiring, they may not be working full time. And so that is going to especially affect certain language groups. And also resources vary a lot from across the state. We were talking about Yakima earlier. In the courts in Yakima are frequently telling us that they don't have enough interpreters there, especially certified interpreters, to meet the needs that they have. They often have to bring in interpreters from other counties, which makes things more expensive. And it also means that they're bringing the courts in those other counties don't have those resources of those interpreters. So that can be kind of a problem too, where that kind of borrowing interpreters is creating shortages in different areas. And so what we're looking at is kind of recruiting, taking a number of different approaches. We have short-term, medium-term, and long-term. So I work for the Court Interpreter Program, and so a lot of our focus has been on interpreters in the court. But a lot of the other sectors are also experiencing lack of interpreters, and also translators, and pretty much people in every area of language access services. So a lot of what I'm saying is kind of applies in a broader sense beyond just the courts. When a lot of places are having a lack of quality language services, such as in medical settings or school settings. And when those shortages happen in those areas, that ends up also affecting the courts, because people may end up having to use the court system at a later time. But in a larger sense, it's also, we're really just trying to reach out and help the same communities. So our different areas have often been very siloed, and I think that I'll talk about collaboration. I think that's something that really also needs to be, or needs to change and needs to grow. So just talking just briefly, like for short-term strategies, we've been doing more targeted trainings. We're expanding the exams that we offer interpreters as part of the credentialing process that we have, working on improving the existing trainings that we have. And that's where a lot of the work is being done, partly because we know it's a smaller group of interpreters and we know how to help them. We know what the needs are and we know who they are. And so, but we're also looking at medium-term approaches, which is also more outreach. We're working on how we can better mentor interpreters, how the AOC can support local courts, both if the courts have employees there that are bilingual and want to become interpreters, and also if they have local people there that in the community that want to become interpreters. One of the, Washington being decentralized means that it can be a little more difficult to know exactly what's going on. And so trying to find ways to facilitate what courts can do to help is a big part of what we're thinking about. In fact, we're actually doing an intro to interpreting class in a few weeks, which is one of our first classes that we've done like this. It's kind of a basic level just to let people know about the field, and hopefully we'll be able to do that more regularly. But the long-term approach is really what we all have to think about and what we need to collaborate more about. Part of it is letting people know about this profession of interpreting and translation and other kind of fields, and also how valuable those language skills are. Developing a pipeline in the profession is really one of the most important elements. It's not something that the courts can really do alone. And the lack of interpreters just isn't in the courts, like I said. It's in medical interpreters, it's social service interpreters, interpreters in the education system. So creating an education program where people can improve their existing language skills and also then gain interpreting skills and then specialize in other areas is one approach we're looking at. But we also need to make sure they're affordable, because getting the skills to become an interpreter is, it takes a lot of time and investment, both money and time. So probably the state will need to find ways to help subsidize those trainings and create trainings. Right now, there are very few in the states training programs, and none of them are specifically about court. And part of the problem is that there's not a lot of people coming into the programs, so that, so colleges and community colleges don't necessarily keep those programs around. And so here are just a few kind of potential partners that we've talked about. A big one is government agencies, just because we're in the area of public service. And a lot of government agencies also use court interpreters. Department of Licensing, Office of Administrative Hearings, Department of Revenue. I think pretty much all government agencies need court interpreters at some point. So the shortage is really is being felt everywhere. Also, colleges and law schools are going to be a key part. And they often say they have a lack of students to keep their programs going. So I think those are a key area that we need to work with to create these programs. And the Bureau of Labor and Statistics has predicted interpreting translation as a really growing field, but it's not really being reflected in the programs we see. Community groups are a big part of it too. And we don't have a lot of experience working with community groups directly, being at the AOC. I think it's one of the advantages of maybe working with the ATJ board. We have talked a little bit with some of the people here in the past. And I think that's going to be one way we're going to help to go forward. There's also some national organizations that we're working with. Media will be able to help. And really, other states are a big issue. Like I mentioned, these interpreter shortages are being felt everywhere. And the lack of training programs is also, almost nationwide. There are some training programs, but they're very few. And often they're quite expensive. And so they're not really open to a lot of people that we need to work with. And so these are just a few of the challenges we're looking at. No pipeline in the profession, as I've talked about. Kind of a lack of awareness of the profession. It's a court especially, but interpreting in general is very challenging and requires a high level of skills. It can be very demanding. And for courts themselves, a lot of times we can't even promise full-time work for some languages, but we need to, for the interpreters that we need, for the quality interpreters, That again takes a lot of time and investment. This is why we also need kind of that collaborative approach. Working conditions are a big part of it. Courts generally pay more than interpreters in medical settings, but interpreters can sometimes make more money with private attorneys and businesses. The court interpreter credential is one of the most difficult interpreting credentials to get. So often businesses, Amazon, Microsoft, they look for court interpreters. I've talked to some interpreters talking about making 3 or more times as much, interpreting like a video game conference than they would for court. So I think that the kind of pay that we're looking at is going to have to change a little bit, which will drive up costs everywhere, of course. But it's something that's really important because we need to remunerate interpreters for the skills that they have. In the past, that hasn't really happened. And some other states have already experienced, like Maine, Massachusetts had a court interpreters go on strike. They're a more centralized system. And a lot of states are increasing their pay. So we're also looking at interpreter compensation and how we can make that more fair in Washington. And one other element too is that a lot of kind of surveys point this out, but interpreters tend to be women and they tend to be immigrants. And these are historically marginalized populations where they're often not paid as much and their skills are not respected. And so that I think plays into some of how people view interpreters. And a large part is also the monolingual mindset that American culture has. We don't really value language and the ability to speak multiple languages. Recognize the value of being multilingual. And that kind of holds us back from utilizing the language potential that so many people have. For example, some language programs are the first programs to be cut at the university when there are budget constraints. And so that is part of it, and we need to kind of change that idea. It also keeps people from considering language access when they're thinking about kind of jobs they want to go into. And it also affects kind of the policies we have and we're trying to set up. And I think there has been a larger awareness of language access over the past several years, and changes in policy. But we also can't really enact some of those policies because we just don't have enough resources to really make that possible.
Thank you, James. Are there any questions? Oh, I see Jeremiah has a question.
Yeah, thank you, James. To what extent are interpreters able to work remotely? Has that been incorporated into any courts?
Yeah, this has changed quite a bit over the past few years, with COVID. I think, before COVID, we were struggling to find ways for courts to allow people to appear remotely, because that can help in a lot of circumstances. And then courts obviously, instantly switched over when COVID happened. For most courts, I think there are a few holdouts. But courts are moving back to in person for most proceedings. And that's actually caused another issue, because interpreters, like people in every other profession, I found out it's really nice to be able to work from home and not have to drive from assignment to assignment to assignment and have to deal with traffic. And so let's affect interpreters are more reluctant to work in person, and that's so interpreters are asking for more funding, more travel time, being paid for travel time, which makes sense. But courts have been, I think there has been a change over the past year or so. Courts being willing to maybe we need to pay more to have them come in person, because it's costing them more, because they can have much more assignments at home. And so, but there's the debates about, and I don't think anyone knows exactly where this is at, but the quality of interpretation that's done remotely, and how if that affects people's understanding. Is it when you have that distance, does that affect someone's actual comprehension? I think the people are still trying to figure that out. But certainly I think remote and the increase in remote services is going to be here for some languages all the time, especially rare languages. Like in Washington, almost all of the interpreters aren't Spanish or Russian, are in kind of King County, Snohomish, Thurston, kind of where the big majority of population is in Washington. So when you need an Arabic interpreter in Spokane or in Tri-Cities, it can be harder to meet that need in person. And actually there's more interpreters coming from out of states as well. Interpreters can get a reciprocity with their credential. And so that's we've had a lot big increase in those interpreters over the past few years for that reason.
I see Murph has put in the ADA standards in the chat. Thank you, Murph. I see Chach, you'll be our last question because we're going to have to move on. So
yeah, I am just curious, how much does an interpreter get paid here in Washington? And I realize that you're taking that into consideration, but I think that needs to go up dramatically. The other question for you is, can you interpret from out of state? Is there a reason we need them? If we're doing remote, does it matter that they are in Washington or could be in a state where maybe we can have more people interpret that might be located elsewhere?
Sure. So the pay rates in Washington are completely different everywhere. Every court is kind of independent in how they set their fees for interpreters and what kind of policies they have. It's been for a long time, it wasn't increasing at all. I think it seemed like for several years it was stagnant at about $50 per hour at many courts for certified interpreters. So that's kind of the top. Courts have been, I think some courts in King County are up to like 70 an hour. A lot of courts around the state are at 65 an hour. And again, these are for certified. For other, it might be lower for other languages. And then courts, interpreters can sometimes set their own rates almost. It can be kind of a negotiation because it's a free market. So it's a supply and demand. So that comes into play sometimes as well. And regarding the out of state, our state statute basically requires courts to hire interpreters that are credentialed by the AOC first. They have to use a credentialed interpreter credentialed by the AOC unless good cause is found. And so that can mean different things, but that's kind of how the statute is. So courts do use out-of-state interpreters at times, though.
I guess my question is, do they have to be here in Washington to be certified?
No, they don't. We have a lot of interpreters who got certified in other states and have gotten their reciprocal certification here. And actually during COVID, a lot of interpreters have moved around because they could. So that's been kind of a change in the field too, that I think we're seeing where it's going.
thank you, James. Bob, it looks like you wanted to comment.
I would like to, for the point of order, I'd like to point out that our interpreter, Melissa, she's trying to smoke at the ear. She's been interpreting for 15 minutes straight. So I think we would like to conclude the wrap up because she needs to leave for another missed time.
Absolutely. So thank you, Bob. Thank you, James. And thank you very much, Melissa, for your work today. All right. With that, we will go on to our next topic, which is the ATJ Board Stipends draft policy. And I'll turn that over to Diana.
Great. So in the materials is a draft policy that provides a cover memo that gives the background. So real quick on just the background of the stipend, the board decided last fall to research as to whether to give stipends to board members with lived experience, and that committee did research and then presented it to the board in January, at which time the board decided to approve the approach of giving board members with lived experience a stipend, and the proposed or the recommended amount was $100 an hour with an average of 7.5 hours per month, which equals out to a $9,000 stipend over a year-long period of time. And so from there, the board decided this is what the approach we want to do, but then you need the funding to actually make it happen. And so you then, through Bonnie and I, put in a request for funding to the two sources of funding that you do get funding from, which is the Supreme Court and the Bar Association. With the Supreme Court, we sent a letter, I think shortly after that January meeting. The Chief Justice has let us know that they would be discussing it in their en banc meeting with the other justices. And we just got an update a couple weeks ago that they're still discussing it. So we don't have any decision from them. And then I guess as a side note, just with regards to the Supreme Court funding, the Office of Administrative Hearings, sorry, the Administrative Office of the Courts, I'm getting my acronyms mixed up, not OAH, AOC. They have a supplemental funding process, and I know Terry has talked to Don Marie Rubio, who had encouraged us to possibly look for funding that route as well. So that's also in process. And then in terms of the Bar Association funding, they're in the process, as I put in the cover memo, of their budget planning, which ultimately their fiscal year starts in October 1st. So they approved that budget in September. The response to the funding for the stipends was, as you know, we can't agree to that funding unless there's some sort of policy in place to do that. And so you decided at your last meeting, okay, let's propose a policy to the WSBA Board of Governors. And presumably this policy would apply to any volunteer group at the Bar Association that is actually a bar entity or staffed by bar staff like you all, the ATJ Board. So, so the draft in the materials is the first take that I did to looking at the memo that you had done in the fall, as well as looking at the Washington State Office of Equity. Their guidelines, they have a lot of resources on their website. And so this is just sort of a first step in the direction. I did highlight in the cover memo some issues that have come up during the conversations we've had as a board. And then also to let you know, like I said, the Bar Association budgeting planning process is underway. The Bar's Budget and Audit Committee had a meeting last Friday, maybe the Friday before, looking at the first draft of the budget, which does include the board's request. And there was a lot of questions. It wasn't a meeting to make any decisions. It was really more of a meeting to ask questions. I will tell you, as the person that was trying to put forward and explain what is behind the board's request, that it wasn't met with a lot of enthusiasm, I should say. And I think it wasn't that people were like, no, we will never have stipends. I think it is the sort of the confusion around you're asking for funding and you're asking for a policy to be put in place at the same time. So I think it just feels, like a lot of decisions to be made at the same time. And so one of the committee members had said it seems like it would be best to have a policy in place first, so we could get our minds around that. We could get plenty of input, since this potentially could really have a major impact on many of the volunteers at the Bar Association, and then to ask for funding following, which the funding request could occur during the course of a fiscal year. There is a small fund that they could look into to granting that funding request midway through the fiscal year. So I think that's one of the decisions that you all need to make, is what's your process that you want to do moving forward. Do you want to continue on this sort of tandem track of both requesting the funding and the policy at the same time? Or do you want to focus on the policy first, and then hopefully once that's in place, then requesting the funding whenever that policy gets in place? And then in terms of the policy piece, is one of the things that I know the board values and what the bar would encourage is, in proposing any kind of policy for the bar, you would want to get plenty of input from other entities and people who are impacted by this potential policy. And so if you were to continue on the same timeline of the budget timeline, that is a lot of, that doesn't give people a lot of time to give their input on the policy, if you want to keep it in tandem with the budget planning process. So I will pause now. I know that was a lot of information. Hopefully that made sense in terms of where you're at and what are the decisions that you need to make at this point.
So thank you, Diana. Just to be clear, the draft policy that you're referring to is page 63 and 64 of the materials?
Yes. I called it, I think I called it Community Lived Experience Stipend Policy. And that's just the name that I came up with, but you could change it to whatever you want.
Questions, comments for Diana? Esperanza.
I don't have any questions. I think you did an excellent job of laying out kind of the story, basically, of this process. And what we're being asked to do today is make a decision whether we want to continue to put forward the policy and the budget at the same time with the bar, or separate them. Policy first, budget later. And if we do budget later, I can't remember if you mentioned when that could happen, or would we have to wait till next year to do that?
I've been informed that it could happen at any time. So, yeah, so you can make a budget request midway through a fiscal year, at which point the Board of Governors would have to look to see, is there funding available to meet that request? And it may be, so that's not guaranteed, but you can make a request midway through the year.
Mhm. So with that, I'd like to propose, and then we can turn it into a motion, right? Because we'd have to have a motion for this, am I right? So I'd like to propose to the board that we go the route of developing the policy and getting the input that we need from the policy, because we don't want a budget request to be turned down because there's no policy. And if we can submit for a budget at any time, then we can do that once the policy is in place. So that would be a proposal I would have, and see what other board members think before we make a motion, either way.
And Jim put a technical suggestion in the chat. My understanding is that the 600 is not going to stay as a limit, but it's important to keep in mind the tax considerations. Mike.
Yeah, I kind of agree with SB on this, because I think the policy actually is going to drive what the budget, how much we're going to ask for. And I think that one of the things I'm wondering, and this could be a question for the stipend group or Diana's, do we know like how many individuals with lived experience who serve on WSBA boards or serve in that capacity would be would be potentially impacted by this, whether it's $45 or up to $100 per hour? Do we have an estimate of how many?
No.
We don't. Okay.
No.
Yeah. So I was just trying to figure out like what the impact would be, not just on our board, because we're the ones going to potentially ask the money, but also putting in a policy that would possibly impact other boards. Yeah, I kind of agree also with SB in the fact that around community engagement piece is getting input from service legal providers as well, who might also be thinking about or have already implemented a stipend policy for individuals who serve, whether it's on their boards or in other different capacities, to see, what this would mean for them. And I don't know enough to be able to speak to what that could look like. With, I know that Northwest Justice Project, CLS and other groups might have that insight on that.
Thank you, Mike. SB, before I call on you, I will just add two points of information. One is that the Attorney General's bill from last session created, for executive agencies anyway, guidelines on how to compensate people for lived experience, in the administrative office of the courts and the judiciary have determined that they do not have to follow this policy, though it would be perhaps persuasive to them and the bar. And the second is, and I support SB's motion, but I have to say, it feels to me like the bar is putting the work on us, when in fact the bar, in my humble opinion, should be the ones that are doing the work to organize their committees and determine what the future of this is going to be. But if we have to be the standard bearer, so be it. Again, my own personal 2 cents. SB.
Yeah, thank you, Terry. I just want to say that as we approach this, that I'm mindful that we want to try to get this done as soon as possible. Because the statement they just made, I mean, no disrespect, but I think if it went back to the bar to figure this out, it would be a long time before it got figured out. And I think we feel more of a sense of urgency because we have people on our board with lived experience that we need to move this forward. If we're serious about having people with lived experience on our committees, on our boards, then we need to move forward on this, and we can't be dragging our feet. And it takes too long. It doesn't have to, but it does take work, and I think we're just going to need to roll up our sleeves and do that work. And some of us are very committed to making sure that gets done. So it's not, oh, let's do the policy first and then look for the funding. That's not a way of saying it's going to take more and more time. We're still looking at trying to do this in the most expedient way with input from the community and keeping in mind things like the point that Jim made. Just learning all those things that have to be incorporated into an issue like this. So, yeah, so that's it. And are we ready for a motion?
Well, there is a motion.
Okay.
And I think your point about the bar is very well taken. So, Mike, is this another
Yeah.
comment on the motion?
It
Or-
is. Yeah,
okay.
it is, because I actually think a policy is really important long-term, but I'm also thinking about short-term, where there's an immediate need for individuals who serve on this board, who bring in a wealth of experience around lived experience.
Mhm.
And I think, I agree. I think that, there's different strategies on this. I think the strategy around policies around long-term, I also think there's a short-term immediate need for this. And I also want to value the individuals who serve on this board to be at least compensated and recognized for their contributions. And so I want to, I don't know if it's an amendment to the proposal, and I think that there's a short-term gap that needs to be addressed until we actually get community feedback and develop a policy. So I would still like to say, at least maybe we put forth a budget need for this period or for 20 until, and then once that policy comes into place, then we begin to align what that is. I mean, those are just my 2 cents. And I don't know if it's considered an amendment to the motion or a different motion or whatnot.
Thank you, Mike. Diana, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, so just to keep in mind that the board, you've already made the decision of what basically your own internal policy is. And so if you were to find money not from the Bar Association, you can do that at any time. It's just that the Bar Association money has not strings attached, but that's why, so if you use your Supreme Court funding, which the Supreme Court fiscal year starts July 1st, and the board hasn't actually talked about how you want to budget the annual $30-some thousand that you get. That is something that you could consider. When we went to the Supreme Court and asked them for funding for the stipends, we asked them for additional money to be able to do that in addition to what they normally give. So that's something that the board can consider in terms of the interim or the here and now. And so you don't have to, or you could find funding elsewhere, outside of the Supreme Court, but it's just the policy piece is just connected to if you were to use your bar funding.
Mhm.
So thank you, Diana. So SB, going back to your motion, the motion was, as I recall, to proceed down both paths,
Mhm.
to push the policy to the bar and then also to maybe I'm not saying this right. Maybe we
It's
should
to develop the policy for the bar, and while at the same time we'll be looking at submitting something to the bar once that policy is completed, right? So that we're right there. We're dropping a request right at that moment that policy is completed and accepted. And in terms, so I don't think we need an amendment, Mike, because this isn't specific to the bar. And I think that the other issue, we can take it up in our working session to figure out how we're gonna address that. And it's, part of the budget committee and figuring those little details out, right? Kind of like you do with your home budget. So,
All right.
Thanks for that clarification, and that makes sense. Thanks.
So then, Mike, do you want to second SB's motion? Or,
I'm happy to second, yes, that motion.
okay, great. So motion and second, all board members in favor of the motion? Aye. Plus Vanna, see. All right, any opposed? Any abstaining? All right. Thank you all for that. Diana.
So now that you made that decision, it kind of, I feel like there's a little bit more breathing room around this policy that you don't have to decide today, like, yes, that first draft looks good, let's send it out for comment. That I'm wondering if we can reconvene that group who had sort of originally started doing the research, or anybody, or just any other board members, but it would be good to have a small group to work with to take a look at the policy draft that I had shared and to give input and to make any changes, and then to come up with some sort of community outreach plan of how we're going to go about it, getting input from different folks. That would be great, just as a next step.
Great. So people who want to volunteer for that should contact you.
Yes.
And I would also like to see it shared with the other independent boards from the bar and see what they're doing. So we can be talking from the same page. All right, in our remaining short time, I do see Alex with us. So Alex.
Hi everyone, I'll be pretty quick. I don't have much to report this month for the EJC, but I will share that this summer the EJC will be pretty focused on local funding efforts. And for the first time, we are trying to do some organizing in Spokane County. So I've been having some conversations with providers in Spokane. I think I've met with everyone in the Alliance who's in Spokane, but if I haven't met with you and you're in this group and you want to be connected, please reach out to me. But we're in the very early stages of those conversations, so I don't really have much of an update there. But yes, please reach out to me if you want to be included in any of those conversations, or if you want to connect.
Just requires undoing system integration.
Thank you. Caitlin.
Sorry for that rude introduction from my computer, double checking. Alex, I didn't mean to cut you off. Are you all set?
I think you are next.
Okay. Thanks everyone. I'll also keep it quick. We were interrupted because I was just checking to make sure that our new race equity grants are posted on our website. I reported it at your last meeting that the committee was about to meet and make its recommendations, which were accepted by the LFW board. So 10 community partners received $40,000 grants over the next 2 years to incorporate civil legal aid into their existing programming. We're really excited about the new grantees, and once again, pretty impressed with the work that our panel did to select them. Oh, thank you, Alex. Some upcoming deadlines of interest, particularly to our grantees, are the deadline for partnership grant applications will be August 15th. And the deadline for and partnership grantees are 2-year grant commitments to ongoing civil legal aid providers. And the deadline for accelerator grants will be September 15th. And accelerator grants are one-time grant recipients who are trying to get legal aid programs who are trying to get a new idea off the ground and see what can take root with some funding within a year. And to sort of set the stage for those grant applications. A letter from Legal Foundation to our grantees and the Alliance will be going out mid-July, sort of on what to expect, the differences between those two grant programs, and, you know, some advice that we'll offer along the way in the assistance of developing applications. Grant decisions will be made the third Friday in November for the following calendar year. You may have noticed that we're hiring for a new director of the Endowment for Equal Justice. We're really excited about this new position. We began advertising for it the first week of June. Alex just posted the job announcement in the chats. So feel free to share that with any colleagues you know who are experienced fundraisers and looking for a really unique opportunity in the Alliance. The application period will be open until, well, it's open until the position is filled, but we're not going to review applications until June 20th. The last thing I wanted to say is we're kicking off our annual summer season of Beer and Justice events around the state. The Campaign for Equal Justice has 10 of these programs lined up. First up is June 15th in Skagit. Then there's an event June 29th in Vancouver, and then July 6th in Bellingham. And then there's a whole calendar of those going on, and we'd love to have any or all of you join us at one of these events. It's a great way just to build community as well as resources for civil legal aid. So happy to answer any questions, although I want to be mindful of your time.
Thank you, Caitlin. There is a question in the chat from Jim. Any information to share on the impact of increased interest rates on IOLTA revenues?
Yeah, that's a good question, Jim. You know, the news is generally good, although as we prepare for the upcoming grant season, we really like to have 6 full months of current year revenue in order to come up with a full and accurate projection. And that's why our letter to the community, you know, to our grantees and our other Alliance partners is delayed until mid-July. So we have the benefit of, you know, solid current year information to provide guidance for our grantees. So look forward to that coming out next month. The news is generally good. We have seen, you know, increased revenue as we predicted, you know, by, you know, the middle of last year because of the interest rate environment. And I think we'll have more specifics to share with what that means and doesn't mean and other factors, you know, again, in mid-July.
Thank you, Caitlin. All right. Well, thank you all. From SB, yes, exactly. If you haven't done so already, please register for the Access to Justice Conference happening September 28th to 30th. And there's a link at the bottom of the meeting agenda. Thank you, SB. For board members, we will continue our conversation next month about award recipients to be given for awards to be given at the ATJ conference. And our next meeting will be July 14th, will be the French Independence Day, Bastille Day. So see you all then. Thank you all.
Thank you, Terry. Bye.